BlackBerry is a 2023 Canadian biographical comedy drama film about the history of the BlackBerry line of mobile phones. It is directed by Matt Johnson from a script by Johnson and producer Matthew Miller, which is adapted from Jacquie McNish and Sean Silcoff's book Losing the Signal, the untold story behind the extraordinary rise and spectacular fall of BlackBerry. The film stars Baruchel and Glenn Howerton in the lead roles as Mike Lazaridis and Jim Balsillie, respectively. BlackBerry premiered in competition at the 73rd Berlin International Film Festival on February 17, 2023. The film was released in Canada and the United States on May 12, 2023. The film has received critical acclaim. The cast includes Baruchel as Mike Lazaridis. Lazaridis is a Canadian businessman, investor in quantum computing technologies, and the founder of BlackBerry, which created and manufactured the BlackBerry wireless handheld device. With an estimated net worth of $800 million, Lazaridis was ranked by Forbes as the 17th wealthiest Canadian and the 651st in the world. Lazaridis was born in Istanbul, Turkey. He was 5 years old when his family moved to Canada in 1966, settling in Windsor, Ontario. At the age of 12, he won a prize at the Windsor Public Library for reading every science book in the library. In 1979, he enrolled in the University of Waterloo in electrical engineering with an option in computer science. In 1984, Lazaridis responded to the request for a proposal from General Motors to develop a network computer controlling display system. GM awarded him a contract. He dropped out of university that year, just 2 months before he was scheduled to graduate. The GM contract, a small government grant, and a loan from Lazaridis' parents enabled Lazaridis, Mike Barstein, and Douglas Freegan to launch Research in Motion. One of the company's first achievements was the development of a barcode technology for film. RIM ploughed the profits from that into wireless data transmission research, eventually leading to the introduction of the BlackBerry wireless mobile device in 1999 and its better-known version in 2002. Lazaridis received an Academy Award in 1999 for technical achievements relating to the creation of a high-speed barcode reader used in film editing. Glenn Howerton as Jim Balsillie, Canadian businessman and philanthropist. He's a former chair and co-CEO of the Canadian technology company Research in Motion, which created BlackBerry, which at its prime made over $20 billion in sales annually. In 1992, after initially making overtures to buy the company, Balsillie invested $125,000 in Research in Motion and joined as co-CEO with founder Mike Lazaridis. The company had fewer than 10 employees and would eventually become an international powerhouse called BlackBerry Limited and have as many as 18,000 employees. Both men prospered from this companionship, with Lazaridis looking after the technological side, while Balsillie looked after the sales, business and accounting end of things. His office never had a wall of tribal masks, but he did hang a winged wooden frog from the ceiling, alluding to if a frog had wings, he wouldn't bump his butt. Many people considered Balsillie as infused RIM with institutional arrogance, as he had remade the landscape of the smartphone industry. He was feared and respected by senior managers within his hierarchy. The twin CEO structure of Lazaridis and Balsillie eventually became cumbersome and inhibited their competition with the Apple iPhone and Google's Android devices. In March 2007, Balsillie resigned his role as chairman of RIM as the firm reported over $250 million in past stock option accounting errors after an extensive review. He retained his roles as co-chief executive and director. On May 17, 2007, RIM announced that, consistent with current best practices in corporate governance, the roles of chairman and CEO have been separated. Matt Johnson as Douglas Freegan. Douglas Freegan is a Canadian businessman who co-founded BlackBerry Limited, then called Research in Motion, in 1984 with Mike Lazaridis. Freegan acted as vice president of operations until his retirement in 2007. When RIM went public in 1997, Freegan owned 5% of shares valued at $23.6 million. In 2005, he owned 2.7% of RIM, worth $396 million. In May 2007, Freegan retired from his position as Vice President of Operations. He owned 2% of RIM stock, valued at $1.3 billion. Freegan ironically sold all his stock in BlackBerry's Research in Motion around the same time Apple released the first iPhone. Cary Elwes as Carl Jankowski. Jankowski was an American businessman who served as CEO of Palm Inc. and Ambient Devices. Jankowski died on May 13, 2023, a day after the film was released in Canada. Some trivia notes. The photo shown of the engineers together at Research in Motion is inspired by the popular photo of ID Software team from 1992. Although the BlackBerry line of smartphones was discontinued, the business itself, BlackBerry Limited, is still going as now a technology company focusing on cyber security. Despite being one of the rare Canadian movies to get a wide release, approximately 200 theatres in Canada, as a mainstream Hollywood movies get in the country, the movie was a huge box office failure in Canada, only grossing $300,000 in its first weekend. Now, I found this to be an absolutely fascinating and brilliantly made movie. It's intelligent, it's sharp, and it's also very witty. This film takes a terrifically entertaining look at the rise and fall of a generation-defining smartphone, and one that dominated the markets and was really the in-fashion thing to have at the time. And then almost as quickly as it became a hit, it immediately fell away with the rise, of course, of the Apple iPhone and the Samsung smartphone generation. Now, I myself was a BlackBerry user, and I remember loving the features on the BlackBerry phone. I loved the keyboard, and of course I loved BBM, a data-driven messaging service, moving away from the traditional SMS service which you paid for. BlackBerries were hip, they were funky, and they were the in thing at the time, and almost everybody had one. But as is the case with most things, particularly in the technology realm of business, is that as quickly as things rise to the occasion, they tend to fall away as well. And soon with the rise of the Apple iPhone, it just wasn't cool to own a BlackBerry anymore. And suddenly BlackBerry fell away as the new traditional smartphones, which we all know and love today, became the centerpiece. For me, this is a superbly well-made film with a fantastically done script, and the cast are absolutely on point here. Baruchel, who's really primarily known as a comedian actor, plays Lazaridis with a perfect sense of bewilderment, intelligence, and social awkwardness. A man who is, of course, a genius, who can see technology for what it is, but can't relate to people. So eventually him and Jim Balsillie, played here by the fantastic Glenn Howerton, form a partnership. Mike, of course, is the brains, and Jim, if you will be the brawn. He's the man that will get the business deal over the line. He knows how to talk. He knows how to sell things. He's brash, arrogant, and backs himself 200%. And the combination of these two men's different talents works so well into what made BlackBerry the huge commercial success it was in the early 2000s. Unfortunately, a lack of ability to adapt to the times in terms of Mike Lazaridis' failure to see the rise of the new touchscreen, as well as Jim Balsillie trying and failing to invest in NHL teams and getting too greedy for his own good, in short led to the demise of the BlackBerry smartphone. This is truly a fascinating story, and Matt Johnson, who of course also plays Douglas Freegan in the film, does a superb job in directing this fantastic, fascinating and interesting story. I recommend this to anyone that's interested firstly in business or that's interested in technology. But particularly for those of you that actually use BlackBerry, remember having one, and just remember as quickly as it was popular, the next day it just wasn't. Technology is fantastic in that it's ever-changing and modernizing every day, yet it remains a completely and utterly fickle realm of the business world. Particularly now when you look at the invention of the mobile phone, one of the most groundbreaking and influential devices ever invented, particularly within the last 30 years. It literally has changed every single aspect of our everyday life. But as time moves on, our needs and wants change and differ, and BlackBerry managed to meet those for a short period of time in the early 2000s. Unfortunately, for this relatively small Canadian company, it just wasn't able to compete with the might of Apple and Samsung, and was dropped almost as quickly as it was founded. A truly inspired piece of filmmaking, and a film I'd highly recommend to anyone. It's entertaining, it's fascinating, it's introspective, and very much relatable. BlackBerry gets a 9.5 out of 10.